Good morning, and welcome to the Naval Historical Foundation's third Second Saturday webinar, where today we will discuss Herman Wouk's brilliant novel and movie, The Caine Mutiny. I am safely social distancing from my condo in Alexandria, Virginia, and I have my steel ball bearings and pack of Lucky Strikes as props for today's event, much like the Rocky Horror Picture Show, but more nautical. The gallon of strawberries, if you're wondering, are in my kitchen, or galley. We are pleased that our great friends at Capital Bank are sponsoring this webinar. Capital Bank has been a stalwart friend of our foundation throughout the pandemic and handled our special financial needs from the CARE Act and Payroll Protection Program. It doesn't get any better than to have a financial institution that has their clients' backs through thick and thin, such as Capital Bank has had for us at the Naval Historical Foundation. Thank you for your sponsorship. Our distinguished panel today is exceptional. Our moderator is Dr. David Rosenberg. He is a military historian and defense analyst at the Institute for Defense Analysis with expertise in naval and nuclear history. Dr. Rosenberg has taught at the Naval Academy, the Naval War College, the National War College, and Temple University. A retired captain and intelligence officer in the Navy Reserve component, he served as the China Senior Intelligence Officer Reserve at the Office of Naval Intelligence in 2009 and 10. He commanded Navy Reserve Detachment ONI 0466. Dr. Rosenberg also serves as a distinguished board member for our foundation. Our panelists should be no strangers to our viewers. We are very pleased to have speaking for the Herman Wouk book view of this discussion, Captain Kevin P. Miller. Kevin is a 24-year veteran of the Navy and a former tactical naval aviator who has flown the A-7 Echo Corsair II and the FA-18 Hornet. He commanded a carrier-based strike fighter squadron in combat, and during his career logged over 1,000 carrier-arrested landings. He is the author of some spectacular novels, and I've read them all, including Raven 1, Declared Hostile, Fight, Fight, and most recently, The Silver Waterfall, a novel of the Battle of Midway. His latest novel was recently featured in the Naval Historical Foundation's Authors Chats. Discussing the movie version of the Caine Mutiny is Captain David M. Kennedy. Captain Kennedy served as a naval aviator with rotary wing and fixed wing operational tours. He is a graduate of and staff officer to the United States Naval Test Pilot School at NAS Patuxent River. He is a gifted screenwriter and developer of military-themed films and documentaries, participating in films such as G.I. Jane, the television series JAG, Executive Decision, Pearl Harbor, Black Hawk Down, Behind Enemy Lines, the Discovery series in a 10-part view, Carrier, Astronauts Wives Club, and The Right Stuff. He is also editor-in-chief of the Association of Naval Aviation periodical Wings of Gold magazine. I kid you not, to quote Captain Queeg, you will like this webinar. Stay tuned as I will join you again for our question and answer period. Send all your questions, please, through the Q&A feature. I will now enjoy my throwback Lucky Strike and steel ball bearings as you enjoy this presentation. Dr. Rosenberg, over to you. Everyone enjoy.
Admiral, thank you very much. It is my pleasant duty to provide some background, both literary and naval, on our author today, Herman Wouk. Herman Wouk was born in the Bronx, New York, in May of 1915. He grew up in the Bronx. His parents had emigrated from Minsk in Russia, now Belarus, and his father ran a steam laundry. Young Herman, folks, I can't see the slides. I can do it without slides. Okay. Young Herman uh, uh, showed a literary bent early and ended up going to Columbia University, where he graduated with honors in 1934 at the ripe old age of 19. He and his college roommate, Alan Auerbach, then decided, having read that the now famous radio comedian Fred Allen had lost their chief writer, volunteered to take on those duties. For the next 5 years, Wouk and Auerbach successfully charmed and entertained millions of Americans who tuned in to Allen's CBS radio show. As the darkening war clouds gathered, Wouk tried to find a way to avoid the new draft and looked into the potential of joining the Navy Reserves. Unfortunately, he was told that you needed to be an engineering graduate. The day after Pearl Harbor, however, after which time, by the way, he had actually been drafted and received his notice and taken his Army physical, he went down to a training ship on the East River and asked whether or not, and inquired whether he might join. A board of 5 officers queried him, decided that he in fact had a lot of talent, and were fascinated by the fact that he worked for Fred Allen. Unfortunately, what happened was they told him that because he had been drafted, he could not, in fact, join the Navy. They also said anybody who could write for Fred Allen ought to be able to think of something to solve the problem. Wouk immediately called Fred Allen, went to his apartment. Allen wrote out a lowercase letter, which was Allen's style, to Wouk's draft board, recommending him for the Navy Reserve. Wouk then went to the draft board, who immediately said, well, okay, if Fred Allen wants this, we'll take care of it, and in fact changed Wouk's status. Wouk went back to the ship on the East River and was given a well done by the board. Wouk then joined the Navy Reserve, went through midshipman school in New York, probably at Columbia University, and in February 1943 sailed for the South Pacific. There he joined the USS Caine. The Caine was a World War II force-track destroyer that had been converted to a destroyer minesweeper. The Caine had already seen a lot of action in the South Pacific during the Guadalcanal campaign, and would see more in the ensuing 2 years that Wouk served aboard her. The Caine engaged in operations in the Solomon Islands, in the Russell's campaign, the assault on Rendova, and then moved to the Central Pacific for the invasion of the Marshalls and then the Marianas. The Caine, unlike USS Caine, actually swept mines and did mine disposal. She also escorted ships, as well as delivered mail and towed targets. After the invasion of Guam in June 1944, the Caine basically did nothing but tow targets, including in the fall of 1944, was stuck at Ulysses towing targets for the Third Fleet when the Third Fleet was in fact at anchor at that island base. In February 1945, Lieutenant Wouk, who had served as assistant comms officer and then first lieutenant on the Caine, apparently requested transfer and joined the USS Southard as she was steaming back to Pearl Harbor for repairs from a kamikaze attack. Southard then returned to Okinawa in May of 1945, where the ship saw a good bit of additional combat through the end of the war. The Southard, however, as Wouk was told that he would in fact take command of the ship and bring her home. However, the ship grounded in September 1945 during a typhoon, and then, having been pulled off and reworked, the ship was permanently damaged and grounded in the Great Typhoon Louise that hit Okinawa in October 1945. As a result, Wouk never rose to command, but returned home and demobilized in 1946. Wouk made the decision that he would become a writer. He had done pretty well. He'd actually written a play earlier and had begun composing novels while he was still aboard the Caine. His first novel was published in 1947. A second one came a couple of years later. And in 1950, he began writing what he called his Crazy Captain book, The Caine Mutiny. The book was published in 1951. It hit the bestseller list. It stayed on the New York Times bestseller list for over 50 weeks. Most of that time at number one, fell off, came back on, fell off again, and continued, and had a total of 122 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. Wouk also won the Pulitzer-prize for literature, for fiction, in 1952. And for that award, he received the exorbitant sum of $500. It's undoubtedly the case that he made a lot more money by staying on the New York Times bestseller list. The next year, Wouk also began work on his play, The Caine Mutiny Court-Martial. However, in between, the question was, could the Caine Mutiny be made into a movie? As Captain Kennedy will discuss, this was a contentious issue, but things actually began to move in a direction of making the movie when the Chief of Naval Operations in 1952, Admiral William Fechterler, upon being asked about the book, replied, in effect, "Yeah, I read it. I can't believe I met every one of those sons of bitches in a long Navy career, but I never had all of them serving on the same ship." This turned things around. The movie was made, produced by the Hollywood producer Stanley Kramer, and directed by Edward Dmytryk. The movie garnered 9 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor, and Best Screenplay. But on top of it, it was the second highest grossing movie of 1954. It became so significant that Humphrey Bogart made the cover of Time that year. The next year, as you may have seen in slides that I cannot see, Wouk also made the cover of Time magazine for his novel Marjorie Morningstar. Wouk continued writing novels into the 1960s. However, as of the early 1950s, he'd already decided he wanted to do another Navy book. He had read an article in Life magazine in 1951 by the journalist Gilbert Kant called Bull's Run, and was convinced he wanted to write a novel about the Battle of Leyte Gulf called The Gulf. He had a fan in Rear Admiral Dan Gallery, the man who sees the U-505 on the high seas, who told him, if you're going to do that, you're going to have to talk to Mick Carney, who had been Admiral Halsey's chief of staff. Carney explained a good bit about not only the battle, but also explained to Wouk all the things that he had seen in a long Navy career, including being warned by the commander of the U.S. fleet before Pearl Harbor, James O. Richardson, about the perilous state of the U.S. Navy before Pearl Harbor. This convinced Wouk that he needed to do a book that not just looked at the battle, but needed to do much more. This resulted in the book that came out in 1971 and rose to number 9 on the New York Times bestseller list, The Winds of War. He followed that up in 1978 with a book, The War and Remembrance. Winds of War ended at Pearl Harbor. War and Remembrance took it through the end of the war. Both were made into miniseries in the 1980s, starring Robert Mitchum as Victor Henry, Captain, Admiral, and later retired Vice Admiral, U.S. Navy, who in effect saw everything during much of this time. Herman Wouk continued to write. He ultimately completed 4 plays, 14 novels, and 4 nonfiction books before he passed away in May of 2019, 10 days from his 104th birthday. His last book, Sailor and Peddler, is a reminiscence of much of his literary experience, and I recommend it to you. The other thing to note is this. Herman Wouk was a longtime member of the Naval Historical Foundation who paid his dues every year. I now turn this over to Captain Kevin Miller, who will in fact carry the story of the novel forward.
Well, thank you, Dave. Appreciate that. Yes, Herman Wouk, what a guy, what a career. My role here now is to talk about the Caine Mutiny from the perspective of a recently published historical fiction novelist. Talk about the comparative books of the period and today, and talk about the relevance of the novel today. Next slide, please. Why is fiction important to us? Fiction puts us in the minds of the characters. The characters can be developed, and we can have empathy for them. We can imagine ourselves dealing with what they're dealing with in the story, and how we would react. Maybe we would react differently. So there's certainly a value for that. We have war games, and it's war games are fun to play. They're tough to plan, but they're interesting. What if? So we have our forces and how the forces interact with each other, with political civilian leadership, and certainly the enemy, and we have to react. We learn a lot from war games, and we can apply those lessons. How does the human condition apply to policy? If we sent a couple of carrier strike groups up above the North Cape of Norway, that would certainly engender a reaction, and one that we don't want. I mean, we wouldn't do that. There are several reasons that we wouldn't, but why wouldn't we? Well, we know what kind of reaction we can expect because we've studied the human beings on the other side and how they would react to that, so we can imagine. We learn through stories. I can think of in flight school, the procedure might say don't do multiple aileron rolls with fuel in your tip tanks. And okay, got it. But then when you hear from one of your buddies that just came back and scared his or herself, hey, I did some aileron rolls which I shouldn't have done, and I couldn't control the airplane and barely got it back, then that is going to resonate with you. Those sea stories, lessons learned. Okay, I'm gonna file that one away. Captain Dale Relog, How We Lost the Great Pacific War. And this is a fictional essay that imagines ourselves a couple of years from now in the Pacific and what could happen. This won the first prize of the Naval Institute essay contest. I mean, and the Naval Institute, a no-nonsense publication, but certainly sees the value of fiction. Next slide, please. The Caine Mutiny, as Dave said, published in 1951. Over 200,000 words. Now that is a big book. Publishing would classify anything in the low 100,000 word count, 110,000 words, as an epic novel. And publishing actually would like novelists to write in the 80 to 100,000 range. And so if you have a book that's going to be 200,000 words, they'd like you to write two. And there's business reasons for that, certainly. But this is Wouk's third novel, and he had some credibility, and so he was able to get away with that, if you will. Just to give you a comparison, Gone with the Wind, 225,000 words, and then Wouk's later novel, War and Remembrance, over 400,000 words. Just incredible works. It took a look at the Navy that the people hadn't seen. This is a less than flattering look at the U.S. Navy, and at the end of World War II, into the 1950s, everyone had a very high regard for the military and for the Navy, and you think of carriers and battleships, and USS Caine was anything but, and it was a bucket, rust, peeling paint, crews uniforms out on clotheslines. It was a rock bottom routine of Navy life, not any glory for USS Caine. What genre does this fall under? And in Amazon today, you can find the Caine Mutiny under military fiction and classic action adventure. That's valid. It's not a techno thriller, although there is some action, but certainly The Storm is action. But it is really at its base a novel about people, and it's really two novels that we'll talk about in a minute. Is the Caine Mutiny historical fiction? And I would say no. The Killer Angels, about the Battle of Gettysburg by Michael Shara, is historical fiction where he changed no facts, but he gives voice to Lee and Longstreet and Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, what they're thinking, the conversations that they would have had. To me, that is true historical fiction, although certainly the Caine Mutiny takes place in the historical period of World War II. Next slide, please. It's 2 books in one, and we learn about Ensign Willie Keith, and even before he became an ensign, Willie Keith was a rich kid, upper crust, and gone to Princeton, and he could play the piano, so he meets a saloon singer in Manhattan and falls for her. But then this war thing is happening, and he realizes, I better get involved in it before I get drafted. So he goes into the midshipman school, and he's not a good midshipman. He's kind of a screw up, but he works his way through and gets his commission and gets orders to ship in action in the Pacific Ocean. His romance with May, Herman Wouk talks about the social conditions of the day. Very interesting. Again, Willie is a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. May is first generation Italian and Catholic, and so that kind of raises some eyebrows in the society of the day that Wouk touches upon. We deal with this today in our society, and we know what's going on, but to see Wouk write about it is interesting. We talked about Caine, it's rock bottom duty. Captain Queeg in the book initially is a nice guy. There's the initial captain, De Vries, who's a tough guy, and Willie chafes under his leadership. Queeg, okay, he's the new guy. He seems like a nice guy. And then, of course, during the course of the novel, his personality changes that we see. There's all the incidents, and one of the incidents is left out of the movie. And this is where Queeg takes Caine to sea for the first time at Pearl Harbor and scrapes the side as he gets out of the nest, and then has a close call with a battleship getting out of the channel. Yelling at people on the bridge. There's the infamous tow line cutting scene, and then followed by the Yellowstone incident in combat and strawberries. And there was another scene that didn't make the movie that was in the book. I think they were invading the island of Saipan, and Caine had a clear broadside shot at an enemy shore battery that was firing at them, and it doesn't get any better. But the captain refused and withdrew. And then there's the infamous typhoon scene that leads us to the trial. And you can make a case that this is a second book. And Herman Wouk did not have any legal training that I'm aware of, but just a masterful job of talking about how you can look at the same situation from 2 different points of view as attorneys would in a courtroom situation. That, of course, courtroom scene was made into a play written by Herman Wouk that is ran on Broadway for many years and is probably still available, and it can be purchased as a standalone book. After the trial, Caine goes to sea again in the novel, and now Lieutenant Kiefer is the captain, and Kiefer in combat fails, and he knows that he's failed. He knows deep down that he's a coward, and so he leaves the ship, and after it takes a kamikaze hit, he leaves the ship, and Willie Keith is the last commanding officer of USS Caine and takes it back to New York, where May is. He had jilted her midway through the novel, but he realizes, no, she's the one I want. I don't care what my family thinks, and tries to win her back. That part is not in the movie. The movie has them at the pier, and it's a wonderful, loving scene, and Willie takes the ship underway in San Francisco, and it ends there, happily ever after. In the book, you don't know. Next slide, please. The Caine Mutiny is different. Again, this is kind of the unglamorous part of the Navy, and the public had been fed all the wartime propaganda, carriers, battleships, and steely-eyed, chiseled young men, fighting for freedom, and this shows the dark underside of human nature, some of the worst qualities of human nature from many of the characters on either side. Certainly, Captain Queeg is a bad guy. But there are officers in the wardroom that were bad guys too. It holds a mirror up to us and to our society. Again, the empathy. How would I react in that situation? Wouk does a wonderful job, and this is what writers and novelists want to do. You want to entertain first and educate second. And anyone that has a naval background or not can be entertained and educated by this work. Next, please. Comparative books. At the same time, James Michener was out there, and he had published Tales of the South Pacific in the late 1940s to great acclaim, followed very closely by The Bridges at Toko-Ri, a classic book of naval aviation in the Korean War. I heard that Michener said that he was most proud of that work, although it's really only a novella. It's quite short, only 93 pages, compared to the 600 of the Caine Mutiny. In the 1950s, Captain Edward L. Beach, who had been a submarine skipper in World War II, wrote Run Silent, Run Deep, made into a classic Hollywood film. He followed that with a sequel, Dust on the Sea, another outstanding novel. Same characters. There's tension in the bridge and the control room of the submarines. There's a love triangle involved. A very honest look at humans in warfare. Mark Raskovich wrote The Bedford Incident, and again we have a troubled CO who is riding the crew hard, and he's willful, and he's on a destroyer on his own, and he is, he's God out there as captains are, so to speak, and an incident happens because the crew is just on edge at all times around this guy. The Bedford Incident, I believe, if it is not required reading, certainly should be for naval officers. Next slide, please. Did the movie follow the book? And it did a pretty good job. The movie is roughly 2 hours long, and Captain Dave Kennedy will talk about it here real soon. But the Willie Keith character, some of the early character development is lacking in the movie. But in the movie, you know that, okay, here's Ensign Keith. He's green, and he's trying to find his way, and so they portray that well. In the book, Steve Merrick, the XO, is given a lot more development, obviously, and he had a great seagoing career in the fishing industry before the war, so he knew his way around the sea and the ways of the sea. So, but again, in the movie, he's portrayed as a competent officer all around. The part about Lieutenant Kiefer taking command of Caine and then his cowardly act off Okinawa is left out of the movie. And then again in the movie, you think that Willie and May live happily ever after. In the book, it's life isn't always so simple, but it's left open to you, the reader. The courtroom scene is classic, and the movie does, in my view, a better job of the Queeg breakdown, where he just goes off and Wouk writes about a page and a half and just run-on sentences of Captain Queeg talking about all the incidents and defending himself. But the movie shows you the looks on the faces of everyone in the courtroom as their mouths are open, watching Queeg just go off like he did, and then Queeg realizes it. Later, we find out that Merrick is acquitted. A classic scene. The scene in A Few Good Men, in 1993 film, is another that unforgettable naval courtroom scene. Next slide, please. Summary. Certainly, the Caine Mutiny should be required reading by naval officers and military officers. You're in a situation, leadership proves a challenge. You've got to deal with it. However, there may be a case that action must be taken. We learn through these stories, and we can the history of the Navy is told by organizations like the Naval Historical Foundation and certainly NHHC, but the Marine Corps does a super job of inculcating their Marines at boot camp and at the basic school on the history of the Marine Corps. In recent years, I'm aware that naval aviation has followed suit, and naval aviation has taken classroom time to teach flight students in Pensacola about the history of naval aviation as they begin their journeys, and that is absolutely beneficial. Who are the modern authors in this genre? Well, Tom Clancy and Stephen Kuntz, and they write about flawed characters. certainly Kuntz more than Clancy. George Galderisi, Jeff Edwards, Andrew Watts, Rick Campbell are new guys on the scene. Duderman certainly has done some terrific historical work, all worthwhile to read those guys. But how about history in general in the United States? And we know that it's been underperforming for decades, and it has been de-emphasized in the classroom, in the college classroom, and in the high school classroom, and often some of the textbooks that we parents can read. Hey, that's not quite right, but it's not in the public square. And historians think, to write books, historical fiction novels, like The Killer Angels and others is not a good use of history. I disagree with that, because a lot more people are going to read a novel and learn more than they would by picking up an official history of, say, the Civil War. These works also resonate with today's headlines. You can pick up a copy of Navy Times in the past 10, 20 years and beyond, and from time to time there's a troubled command is on the front page, and we know that there are reliefs for cause, and there are waterfront rumors that get around, and this stuff happens. And so it happened in World War II, absolutely, on all kinds of ships. We know it did. And it happens today. It's happened for Forrester and Martin and O'Brien have written about it. It's part of the human condition. And with that, I will turn it over to my friend Captain Dave Kennedy to walk us through the movie.
Hello, hello. Can everybody hear me okay? All right, thank you very much. First slide, please. I'm here to give you a screenwriter and producer's perspective on this classic film based on the novel. Next slide. And providing that perspective to encourage reflections on current trends and to spark some discussions and some feedback following this presentation regarding Navy production support and the value of that and the legacy of that. Next slide. And you have to ask yourself first, why are stories like this so important? Well, as I tell my two sons, who are both naval officers, you are what you eat, and you are what you read, and you are what you watch. So be careful what you eat, what you read, and what you watch, because depictions influence societal behavior. And oh, by the way, I asked the audience, what are you watching today? Who are our current heroes? How have they changed over the time? And what has that depiction changed in terms of accepted behaviors? Next slide, please. The Caine Mutiny, look at the movie. It's a complex story with flawed characters facing real challenges, life and death stakes, military action. It is historical fiction, and it's a classic hero's journey where an individual and everyday characters are confronted with challenges that the viewers can relate to. But it's also a glimpse into a unique culture that people at the time were not that aware of and were very fascinated to learn more about. The length of the movie, 124 minutes, that's 2 hours. You have to ask yourself, is that too long? Is it too short? The director, Edward Dmytryk, he wanted a 3-hour movie. The studio said, nobody's going to sit through a 3-hour movie. We have very standard attention spans. And the standard length for a movie at the time, 90 to 120 minutes long. And this one was a little longer than that. But again, it benefited from the discipline of having to focus on certain things and leave some things out. That's one of the issues. Next slide. A dysfunctional surface warfare wardroom during wartime. And it was filmed with Navy production support, direct support at various locations ashore and at sea, including Los Angeles, San Francisco, Pearl Harbor. Many of us recognize some of those facilities. We recognize UCLA. This was a feature film on a big budget, and it had a major studio release and did very well, as has been discussed. It also had an A-list cast and crew. Interestingly enough, the character Robert Francis played, you have to ask yourself, why didn't we hear more of him? Why do we only know of some of the other actors that were there? Well, sadly enough, that young man died in a private airplane crash in 1955. And one of the reasons that you probably have not, that was the reason we haven't seen him, and he didn't go on to be a longer-lived movie star. Next slide. Why this movie stands apart? Because it was written by someone who actually lived in the culture, as Kevin mentioned. It provided audiences with a glimpse into a world they did not know about, and it was a brutally honest portrayal. And interestingly enough, the depictions were honest, even at times uncomfortable. But keep in mind that the movie ended with a sense of optimism. The scene that is mentioned where the young protagonist, played by Robert Francis, is now taking the ship out. Make all preparations for getting underway. So no matter what happened before then, the movie does end with a sense of optimism, which is one of the reasons that the Navy was able to support it. And it was a product of a very collaborative production effort that benefited from that Navy support and from the Navy inputs, including the Navy restrictions on certain things. Go ahead. Next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit about the joint production process. As Admiral Masso pointed out, I've been involved in quite a few of these productions where the military services and civilian production units come together. It's highly collaborative. It's governed by a negotiated production support agreement that puts the who, what, where, and when into it. This joint production process allowed for access to facilities, personnel, and expertise for the Caine Mutiny. The Navy required approval of the script, which took over 2 years. At first, the Navy had very serious misgivings about the story, and we will talk a little bit more about that shortly. But the Navy assisted with scheduling of assets. They did have approval over script revisions, and Navy representatives were present during filming and in post-production and assisted and helped fix some of the issues that they saw. The Navy did review the final cut prior to release, and by the way, that same process is in effect today. And interestingly enough, it has been on more than one case where the military service that has supported a film production looks at the final cut and withdraws its support before the film is released. Next slide. What would you, as a film producer, as somebody that's trying to make a movie, why would you seek Navy production support? What's in it for you? The answer is production values you can't get otherwise. People, places, things, real ships. You could go on board a museum ship, perhaps. You can do CGI, you can do things like that. But this is the real thing. And also, and this is a little more subtle, it's for insights that you may not have. Like you think you know about Navy culture, but do you really know about it? This is not the for-profit business world. This is a business ruled by responsibility, authority, and accountability, where there are no dual chains of command necessarily, where only one person can be in charge at one time because it doesn't work otherwise in a military setting, in a setting of difficulty and in conflict. And it's a mysterious culture that people want to hear about. They want to know that where that mystery is. Who knows where the mystery is hiding? Well, those of us that have been there do. Those of us that know the culture. Herman Wouk had been there. He knew the culture. What do you give up as a producer when you get Navy support or military support, DoD support? Well, you give up full creative freedom because now you've got somebody else that's there that's going to say, no, that's not exactly the way it is. He wouldn't really say that. That's not how a subordinate and a superior would act under that condition. And that kind of having somebody talk back to you is something that producers are not necessarily used to hearing, but it's good for the film. Next slide. Signs of a rough passage for this movie. Well, you look at it and, you have to be what we call the moto, the master of the obvious. I'm going to be that junior officer watching the film in the ready room, and I go, wow, I wonder why they did this and versus that. Well, there's a reason. There's always a reason. It had full Navy support, but why don't you have a lot of further acknowledgement or statement of thanks in the credits? Well, you do have one very short one at the very end, but the fact that it opens with a reclama that says there's never been a mutiny, well, that shows that the fact that there had been a mutiny, perhaps depicted in the movie, is a sensitive item for the U.S. Navy. And there was a conflict here in the making of this movie between the line functions and the staff functions. As Dr. Rosenberg has pointed out in very colorful terms, the Chief of Naval Operations read the story and said, I've been there. This is a true story. This is good. I've been with those SOBs. But that's not necessarily how the staff Navy who was supporting him saw it. But it gets in the Navy, who gets to make the call? The line does. Next slide. The CHINFO, the chief of information at the time, you can see what his concerns were. He said, we're going to put in the world's idea that the Navy is akin to a confinement in a psychiatric institution. That's not a positive depiction. However, the lengthy process for approval did occur. The Navy recommended that they change the title to the Caine incident instead of mutiny, because mutiny was kind of like an explosive word. But the chief of naval operations had the final say so, and it went forward. Next. The end result is a classic movie that stands the test of time, that shows truth. It resonates with viewers, and it shows that the joint production process actually does work and adds value to the creative process. This is a movie that young men and young women in uniform see, and they stay awake at night thinking, what would they do in these conditions? How would they react? This is a profiles and courage type of a challenge to viewers, and that way it's very valuable. This is not about cannibalistic vampires overcoming the earth. Okay, this is real life. Next slide. Reality and honesty work better than propaganda. It's something that I have to tell producers I'm working with all the time, and also folks that want to tell your story. If you tell if 51% is on your side and 49% is on the other, you win. But propaganda, people don't believe it. Honesty is what this film produced. You have to understand a culture in order to capture it and really understand it. And it also said that teaming with the Navy is a good thing. You add to the list the movies we've already mentioned in this era, From Here to Eternity, Bridges at Toko-Ri, They Were Expendable, Sands of Iwo Jima. All these stories with flawed characters. Think about From Here to Eternity. Can you imagine what the Army had to go through before they approved that? Do our guys really do that when they're off? Yes. But at the end of the day, it ends with a sense of moving forward and accomplishing things. I was involved with and was understood, present when there were discussions about the movie Black Hawk Down. And Black Hawk Down also had some very serious issues having to do with command and control and decisions and combat action. But that movie, very similarly to the Caine Mutiny, was pushed forward because the Army leadership at the time felt that it was very important. And that came straight from their line itself. So they said, this is honesty and it's reality, and it's something we need to portray. Next slide, please. Here's, we can put this up later, New York Times review. They liked and disliked different parts of it. They thought that the romance was a little bit of a superfluous side note, but it was a story about about explosive conflicts and temperaments. And it really did stand the test of time. Next slide, please. That's it. My aspect is a classic study of naval leadership, and it's something that, as Kevin mentioned, that is of value to watch even today. And thank you. I'll turn it back over to the Admiral or to the moderator.
I got it, gentlemen. What a phenomenal job! We're all so appreciative, and the comments in the chat room have just been magnanimous. So thank you so much for breaking it down by the book view and by the movie view. We've got some questions. We could use more, and we hope that this can be a really iterative discussion over the next half hour or so. So please use the Q&A function in Zoom to provide those questions. I'll start with the first question, but Dr. Rosenberg will now join Captains Miller and Kennedy as a panelist as I moderate the questions. But bring your questions to the Q&A function on Zoom. The first question is interesting. Why, in your mind or opinion, is the Caine Mutiny not on the CNO's suggested book list? And to follow that, has it ever been on a suggested reading list by senior naval leadership? And if you know, say, and if you... Was I muted the whole time? I apologize.
No, just for the last few words.
Okay. Anyway, the question was simply, Why is this book not, the Caine Mutiny, not on the CNO's suggested reading list? And has it ever been on a senior leaders reading list? And if not, why not, in your opinion?
I'll offer this. I think that it was on the reading list years ago. Certainly, it was extremely popular back in the 70s, and to whatever degree that this was, there were CNO lists, and I think you can find some of them, but I don't recall them immediately in terms of everything that was on it. And certainly, it was the case that, for example, when Stansfield Turner, as president of Naval War College in 1972, kicked off the Spruance Lecture Series, the first lecturer was, in fact, Herman Wouk. And so it certainly was something that was supported and honored, and certainly continued to be because of Winds of War and War and Remembrance. Why it's not today is a good question. It's perhaps that the book is too long, or World War II is too far away. I don't know, but it's a good suggestion.
Any other thoughts from the panelists? I guess not. Okay. So, kind of a different follow-on, though, is simply, does the book and movie provide relevant leadership or behavioral lessons for today's naval officer, in your opinions?
Admiral, I'll take that one. I believe, yes. The Caine Mutiny, at its core, is a story about people. And those people are fighting against man, they're fighting against machine, they're fighting against nature, all which happens in the fleet today. It happens in the fleet, on ships, and it happens ashore in bureaucracies. The Peter Principle also comes into play here. The Peter Principle was discovered or written about in the early 1960s, although I think people knew about it, that people rise to their level of incompetence. So you have a good lieutenant, department head tour, okay, you might be command material, and then you're in command and maybe not so much. Or you have a good a major command tour, and now you're ready for a strike group, but maybe underperform after that promotion. And it's just the way it is. We can look back now at the Caine Mutiny, and there's Captain Queeg, and there's discussions in both the book and the movie that he had seen a lot of action in the North Atlantic. And did Captain Queeg have PTSD? Back in the day, it was called shell shock, or it was just, just get over it. What are you, a sissy or something? This is, be a man and hack it. But PTSD is real. We know that now, and there's much more acceptance of that now. I believe also that it's relevant for civilians. Again, I mean, this is you have overbearing, C-suite leaders perhaps, and you have to deal with their behavior sometimes out here.
I'll offer this comment that Wouk wrote about in Sailor and Fiddler. He had gotten to know Alan Dershowitz, and Dershowitz by the 1990s had come up to him and said, I used to, in fact, be able to quote from Dostoevsky, and in fact very much enjoyed telling people, using the Caine Mutiny to serve as an example. He said, the problem is that no one reads the Caine Mutiny anymore. And Wouk apparently looked downcast, and he said, of course, nobody reads Dostoevsky either. We also have the example that Tom Selleck in Blue Bloods, if anybody watches that, actually used the comment about strawberries, to which the entire family looked at him as though he was crazy. So it is something that's lost, but might well be resurrected. The other point being, when I was on board USS Kincaid as a JO, it was very clear everybody had read both the Caine Mutiny and had seen the movie, and had also either read the book or, better off, seen the movie, The Bedford Incident, particularly the phrase, if he fires one, I'll fire one, fire one.
Captain Kennedy, anything from you, sir, on that? Or
this is a classic story of group dynamics. You've got the smart aleck. You've got the guy that that subtly undermines the authority of the captain when nobody else is around. And in Command Leadership School, I think we actually watched this movie, and they showed how it's very important for those for those individuals. You can kind of give a pet name to each one of those guys. Is that the bull goose? Is that the quiet whiner? Is that the so-and-so? And you saw that throughout. And the Fred McMurray character, what a case of courage on his part to play such a flawed character. A guy that just every time he took a chance, he put in a little jab. The first time you meet him, welcome to the Caine. Well, this isn't the real U.S. Navy. You know what I mean? He always had some kind of a smart aleck response. And then the idea that the XO has got to prevent gossip from going on. What is the damage of gossip in a wardroom? Well, it's pretty bad. And bad squadrons, we used to have a saying that said, if you want a very long and productive life in naval aviation, for instance, and you want to live for a long time and fly a lot, very carefully select the first squadron that you're assigned to. And the answer is, well, you don't get to. Sometimes you just get thrown into it. So you have to understand that they all look the same. The standard of organization, the number of people, it is very regimented. But within that regimentation, there can be vast differences between the dynamics and the capability of the squadrons. Should Queeg have listened to his people when they first pointed out an issue? You know what I mean? What is the responsibility of the man or the man or woman in command to listen to constructive criticism? That's one of the problems that Queeg has. What is your responsibility as a subordinate to maintain that kind of information? And Queeg comes off as a flawed character, but again, we've been on ships and we've been in squadrons with these same people, so we know that those proclivities. Over.
Thank you very much. And by the way, panelists, we're getting just body slammed with great questions, so just a tad more efficient. That'd be great. So we've got some real legends online. We've got Joe Stanek, who's a professor at the Naval Academy from the great class of 1978, whose acquaintance I made as his detailer in 1982, and I hopefully sent him somewhere that he liked. But he makes the comment, first of all, that Mr. Wouk was a Forstall lecturer at the Academy back in the day, but he also asked the question of specifically to Captain Kennedy, if you could comment on Tom Tully's role, who was Captain DeVries, because both DeVries and Bogart were nominated for Oscars in the movie. Do you have any thoughts to answer Joe's question?
Well, is the question as to what his value or
his role? So DeVries was basically he was Ensign Keith's first CO, and Ensign Keith walks aboard, very entitled, Princeton graduate, very impressed with himself, and he sees what he considers to be a less than stellar ship, and he associates it with a guy that doesn't really behave as if he's as if he acknowledges. In fact, he thinks it's pejorative that he went to Princeton. I do too. But what do you think?
You know what? It's an interesting, as a filmmaker, there's that. Where's the first time you see Captain DeVries? He's in his stateroom and he's got something wrapped around his stomach and he's otherwise naked, right? I mean, is that the way you want to meet your skipper? Is that the way you as a skipper want to meet your junior officers? So it's immediately introduced in kind of a conflict, not a conflict, but something that just doesn't seem exactly right. You know what I mean? And it does show that sometimes appearances are not necessarily truth. You know what I mean? That you have to look a little bit deeper. The Caine is a welcome to the junkyard Navy. My goodness, that's not a recruiting title. Are you kidding me? But at the same time, and I'll keep it short, Sonny, I'm sorry. But what it shows is that a ship that hangs its laundry out on the side, but that's been through Guadalcanal and so, it's probably okay. You know what I mean? There are probably some different standards and it shows the variety still acceptable and still workable. Over.
Yeah, thank you. Any other panelists want to jump on that, or we go on to the next question?
Well,
Kevin Miller here. I'll jump in real quick. My first commanding officer was like Captain DeVries, and in that he pushed me and us nuggets, us new guys, get into the fleet. Okay, you're in the fleet now, and you've got to measure up. You got to measure up very quickly, and so we're not gonna coddle you. And us nuggets, we would chafe at times and grouse in the bunk room, but when he left, I realized what he had done. That he had focused us and saved our lives as we flew around the ship.
Great, great response. Go ahead, Dave, Dr. Dave.
Just two short comments. One tied to Dave Kennedy's comment about the Fred McMurray character, Lieutenant Kiefer. The interesting thing is that when one reads the book and watches the movie, one can think of Herman Wouk as the Kiefer character. After all, he was writing his novel on USS Caine. The interesting point is that we do not know the full story. He never wrote it down. Maybe he left letters, but he never wrote down the full memoir at all of his time in the Navy. Yet what we do know, just from picking things up from various websites like NavSource, when he joined the Caine, his skipper was a Naval Academy graduate from the class of 1931, who was then relieved by a Naval Academy graduate from the class of 1935, and both retired as captains. And so he was, in fact, under the tutelage of professional naval officers. Which one of these was Queeg, or which one of these may have been De Vries, we don't know. But equally important, the other thing is when he joined the Southard, he was XO. And so he played almost all the characters in the wardroom except the CO, and he was the PCO of Southard. And the skipper he worked with for the longest time on Southard was in fact a Naval Reserve Lieutenant Commander. And so it raises some very, very fascinating questions about the Navy of World War II that Wouk was a part of.
Great points. We have a question from a Navy legend in Surface Line, Bill Perenboom, who's from the class of 57. And we have two very close associates who were 57 chair professors at the Naval Academy, Dr. Rosenberg and Dr. Dave Winkler, who's hiding behind the curtain that Carol Merrill is standing next to. But Captain Perenboom, again, legend, he asks, is there any comments aligning the Caine, obviously written in the 50s, with the Arnheider affair, the USS Vance in Hawaii, in the middle of the Vietnam War? I have some thoughts on that if the rest of you aren't that familiar, but go for it. What do you think?
Sonny, you've talked about this, so I think you should take this.
Well, I guess I would say that there is, and there's many lessons that Captain Queeg, he started out, telling the wardroom, he had an AOM, an all officers meeting, and he said, there's 4 ways to do things in the Navy. There's the right way, the wrong way, the Navy way, and my way. And on this ship, if we're going to get along, we're going to do it my way. And very similarly, Captain Arnheider from the Naval Academy class of 52, I knew his XO, Ray Hardy, and I also knew other commanding officers. Lee Case was one of my COs. He was on the Charles Berry. His CO was Dempster Jackson, former retired Rear Admiral from the class of 52. So Jackson knew him as a classmate, knew him as a squadron mate. And fundamentally, he came aboard the Vance in much the same way. There's the right, wrong, Navy way and my way. And pretty much he looked at the ship and then just judged that its presentation, much like we just talked about with De Vries and Dave Kennedy spoke to, its presentation wasn't up to his personal standards, but he didn't give the wardroom any credit or any of the sailors any credit for what they had been through already prior to his arrival. And anyone who knows that era knows that those were workhorses, and they were rode hard and put away wet, and baling wire and duct tape and Babbitt and monkey shit. That's a Navy nautical term. It's not pejorative, but all of these factors, conspired to really make things difficult. And in 100 days, he served 100 days and he was gone. It was much the same thing, disobeying orders, trying, engaging in gunfire support when it wasn't his mission, getting in the way of other ships of the line. A lot of different. There wasn't a tow line, but it was very close. So I definitely think there are some similarities. Maybe not in the ship's mission specifically, but certainly in the behavior of Lieutenant Commander Arnheider on the Vance. And one last point about it, Neil Sheehan wrote the book. I just read it recently. And Neil Sheehan was the guy that broke the Pentagon Papers for the New York Times. So he's a guy with game, right, in journalism. And he was asked by Time magazine to do a number on the Navy. And when he got into under the hood of the issue, he's flipped. And he went to the side of the crew. But this comes. I'm now going to ask you a question because another gentleman, Dale Burridge, said, "Well, he's familiar with the USS Somers, and the Somers did have a trial where a couple people were tried for trying to have a mutiny. Any remembrance of that? I do not myself, but any thoughts on that? Or because the point was there has never been a mutiny on a Navy ship."
I do recall at the Naval Academy, there was a small book that was produced in the 50s that did talk about the Somers Affair and did discuss the role of Alexander Slidell Mackenzie and his hanging of the son of the Secretary of War. But the fact was that it was clearly an attempted mutiny, at least from all the records that went on, that the son of the Secretary of War was in fact thinking about taking the ship, taking over, murdering the command crew, and going off and running a pirate ship. But unfortunately, I think the last time anybody ever looked at it was in an episode of JAG back in the 1990s, which I don't know if Dave Kennedy had anything to do with.
Not with that one.
So our former commander of the United States 7th Fleet, and no, sir, I do not have any Nazi planners for you today. We used to have weekly meetings where he would beat me up pretty hard. But did the Navy cooperate with the making of Winds in War and War and Remembrance, to your knowledge, Dave Kennedy?
You know what? I can't speak directly, but my understanding is that they did. I mean, it was a very positive depiction of the Navy in general. It was, very well done and shot all, in many locations. So we can research that and get back to the Admiral with a full answer if we need.
Roger that. Yeah, Doug, we got your back, sir. Okay, from the great class of
Sonny?
Yes.
Could I jump in here too and just mention to our listeners that we should be very amazed and proud of how the Navy has engaged in the public sphere when it comes to movies. There was a period of time there in the 90s and in the early hundreds where you could make a list and put on the list all the movies about the Navy and Navy personnel, and then all the movies about any other service there was and all their personnel. The Navy would have more than all the other services combined. The Navy's been very aggressive in supporting movies and film productions. When we did Behind Enemy Lines, can you imagine going into a meeting and somebody saying, "What do you want to make a movie about?" It's about two officers who screw up and go off mission and then get shot down. That's not necessarily a positive thing that you would think the Navy would even support. And then the Admiral disobeyed. Oh, that's going to get approved. Not going to happen. Well, it was approved, but it was approved with caveats because the Navy Office of Information doesn't understand that screwing up happens. It's what happens after that. Do you ignore it or do you address it? And in all the movies that we see, the failures are addressed, and they are nothing goes without notice. It's not like it's tolerated. So the Navy is very good at supporting movies about its people, not necessarily just providing background for the for the Terminator series or for the some science fiction, but actually about people. The Cuba Gooding Jr. character in the story about the Navy diver, the stories that we have now about Greyhound. The Navy is very interested in supporting stories that talk about character, and they're not afraid of telling the truth. And one of the reasons is it's a legacy that comes from this Caine Mutiny film, that the CNO definitely stepped in there and said, you know what, this is reality, we're going to support it. And what do we do as naval officers when you get an order you don't necessarily like? Aye, aye, sir, and you execute with, to the best of your ability.
Great, thank you very much. So this question, there's two different people asking the question, but it really is directed to Kevin Miller. So one is, how did you do such a great job on the Silver Waterfall, and what was your writing process? And did you discover in your pathway as you created the great book? And did you deviate? I mean, did you learn lessons from that? And then there's a follow-on question by a second person that's kind of aligned. Given your point that you raised about there should be more movies, what era should we look at to cover that we haven't covered, in your opinion? And others can jump in on those.
Okay, writing the Silver Waterfall, I've always been fascinated by the Battle of Midway, and people that know me know of my interest in it, and I've lectured on it. But it's a novel I always wanted to write, and I wanted to write it like Shara wrote The Killer Angels, by not changing any facts. So I live here in Pensacola, in the National Naval Aviation Museum, the Emil Bueller Library, the staff, they're very helpful with original documents like the Bombing 6 after action report, videos taken of panelists, Childers and Beth again, Mariama, as they discussed their exploits. So I dug pretty deep. I wanted to write a story about the men that fought on both sides. I think it's fascinating to see how both sides react to what's going on the other. So after research, I would sit down and write, and 1,000 words a day is a good day of writing. I get that ball of words, and then you get it polished, and then you hand it over to some guys that I know that know a lot about the battle. Captain J.R. Stevenson, Captain Will Dossel, probably familiar names to many of you here, and then you hand it to an editor, and that's a long process. So that's how I wrote it. Again, it's historical fiction, and you can make a case that the Caine Mutiny is historical fiction, and we can have an argument on that. But I believe that the Killer Angels and my novel, The Silver Waterfall, that didn't change any facts, that were honest to the story, is an example of that. Please forgive me. There was another follow-on question.
Yeah, the follow-up was simply, is there an era in the Navy that we've kind of missed the boat on telling a great story?
I think about that myself. Okay, and people always ask me, "Hey, I love your book. What's next?" And so I was thinking about, what do I want to do? As an aviator, the Marianas Turkey Shoot is of interest to me, and the aviation piece of the Battle of Leyte Gulf and the surface warfare piece of that battle is fascinating, and I think everyone should know about it. Jim Hornfisher, again, hat tip to him. We know that the story of Thomas Hudner and Jesse Brown is going to be made into a film. That's terrific. What a wonderful story, and they'll do a good job. Top Gun 2 is going to come out eventually next year to be released. I think that my first novel, Raven 1, is and please forgive me here, but Stephen Kuntz wrote The Flight of the Intruder, and that's the quintessential era of Vietnam naval aviation. I believe for my generation, Raven 1 tells a story of flying in the Persian Gulf, and so maybe one day. But
sure. And I want to give a shout out to Ward Carroll for Punk's War. That was one that, as a SWO, I couldn't put down too. I mean, I think I read it on one airplane flight from coast to coast.
As the chair of the Submarine League's history seminar, I want to give a shout out to not necessarily to Tom Clancy in The Hunt for Red October, but the movie. Back in 2017, we did a seminar, which I believe is available online, that talked about the fact or fiction of The Hunt for Red October. What is really remarkable is the fact there was a lot more truth in The Hunt for Red October that people could get than had previously been released related to the role of U.S. submarines in the Cold War, including trailing submarines and being in places like the Barents Sea. And this was by Navy decision. That was very, very carefully made. And in fact, one of the more fascinating parts of that story was that when the movie was made, they needed a submarine to take the crew, the actors to sea. And the submarine they used out of San Diego was Salt Lake City. The commander of that submarine was a gent nobody ever heard of again, named Commander Tom Fargo. And Tom Fargo has remained in touch with both the producer, Mace Neufeld, and the guy who played him and imitated him as Bart Mancuso, Scott Glenn.
Yes, that's indeed. I remember that as well. Thank you. A couple of thoughts. It's funny that my former shipmates are circumventing the system and sending me text directly to my phone. But you know, if you have access, then use it, right? So John Carwile from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and by the way, we're live streaming to 4 countries and about 36 states. Okay, so that's pretty impressive. But he asked the question, and it goes back to he's asking the question about when the JAG Barney Greenwald threw the drink in Lieutenant Kiefer's face. What was the scathing comment he said? You know, while you were on the playing fields of Princeton, there's that, and we showed that clip. Sure. in the countdown clock. But the other one, please someone share the other wonderful quote that Kiefer made, Lieutenant Kiefer made about the role of the Navy and what in that. So I'm going to send that to begin with to Dr. Rosenberg.
Well, there is the quote that is more greatly at length in the book when Kiefer is taking Ensign Keith and Ensign Harding on a tour of the USS Caine, and he uses the marvelous line that the Navy is an organization designed by geniuses for execution by idiots. And there is the question, and it goes into a lot more comment in the book about how one should, in effect, put one's mind in neutral and think down to the lowest common denominator to get anything done. There is that interesting question as to whether or not we have ever experienced that situation. Certainly, as a JO, you wonder why you're doing a lot of things, and certainly even in the post-Zumwalt era, Mickey Mouse things would drive you crazy in terms of the things that you had to end up doing as a JO. Now, you can possibly accept the arguments of my friend Jeff Bacon that as you rose higher, you lose your backbone and then ultimately your brain, the guy who draws broadside. And by the time you're a captain, you have neither a brain or a backbone to, in fact, argue. But on the other hand, you do discover that as responsibility gets set, as you rise higher, and especially when you're in command, there is the issue. You may not be a genius. You do have to set the tone and set the stage for helping your people do things. And of course, that's the problem of the Kiefer quote. The Navy designed for execution by idiots is not one where the senior leadership helps. And that's where I think it departs. Although there are cases where the senior leadership does not help. You've already noted some, including the Onheider affair.
Any other thoughts from the panelists? Okay, I'm going to move on. We are getting some great dialogue here. This is great. I'm just so blown away and appreciative. So Captain Perenboom he suggests that an era that we should cover is riverine warfare in Vietnam. And certainly we could add HAL 3, an elegant helicopter squadron that just did their jobs phenomenally. But we also have online Tom Cutler. And of course, Tom always signs his correspondence D-Guts, don't give up the ship. And he's written really the final saying on riverine warfare, brown water navy.
Sure.
He's a historian, a scholar, but his swim lane, there isn't a swim lane he doesn't have. He does everything from the Blue Jackets manual. I call Dave Rosenberg a national treasure. He's a national treasure. But I'm asking you back, Tom Cutler, online here. What do you think about the Riverine movie? And anyway, over to the panel for their thoughts.
I would tie in with some of the comments that Kevin made, but I think that one of the periods that desperately does need coverage is, in fact, the Navy in Vietnam. There's an awful lot there that needs to be written about and covered, in fact, in fiction and in a movie to sort of bring it out. And in fact, as Vietnam veterans age, we're kind of running out of time for folks to capture that. I mean, Ward Carroll did, a few other folks have done that, and obviously Tom Cutler did a superb job with his books on Vietnam. But that having been said, we need more. We need a good bit more in order to be able to carry that forward.
And Dave Rosenberg, I want to piggyback on that. That yes, the Navy in Vietnam, and there's lots of aspects to that. On the aviation side, I believe that Peter Fay's recently published book, Bloody 16, the story of Air Wing 16 aboard a Oriskany during Rolling Thunder, is just fascinating reading. It's a narrative nonfiction, but just outstanding work. And it talks about society in the 60s as well. That could be adapted into a movie, I believe, easily.
So there's another question that's in line with this. And for example, in Vietnam, in the Battle of Hue City, from that, and it's not cited specifically, but there are about 5 ships that were named after people or events. The Hue City itself is a cruiser. The Moinister, okay, right. Robert Moinister went house to house as a JG, in hands-on, hand-to-hand combat. Literally a hero, and he was a SWO. And so, the forces that were mustered, and I think Father Capodanno died in that battle as well. And I think that the list kind of goes on. And so here's really the question. Are we missing the boat in terms of timing by not recognizing folks who were heroic, say, in the battles of Fallujah in the present situation, and understanding that this is now going back 19, 18, 17 years. Your thoughts?
I agree with that, Sonny. Is the nation, you get exhausted from war, and yes, we've been in the Middle East so long. For at the time after Vietnam, for 10 or 15 years, no one wanted to. Vietnam wasn't big, although there were movies like Platoon and other movies that had the dark underside of the Vietnam experience. And then, but there was then We Were Soldiers, which was a superb movie and really true to the book and the story, and honored the men who fought in that battle. So absolutely, there are heroic stories, Navy Cross level stories and above from the Middle East conflicts. We're all aware of Lone Survivor. Would love to see more of that. Would love to see more of the action for the gallantry in places like Hue City and elsewhere.
Yeah, one of the ships I served in was the USS Cook, and it was named after a Naval Academy class of '56 grad, and my skipper Jerry McMurray was actually in the company of his classmate. They were in the same class, same company. And knew him, and so it really had a powerful impact on the crew. But the point of the story is that these ships were being rolled out and named in real time, and we're probably not seeing that right now. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Unfortunately, one of the things that's going on is that we do not have a large enough Navy and a vibrant enough shipbuilding program. The only ships that are being named for Navy people are the Burke-class destroyers. And so while we're putting more out, we're continuing the production line. The fact is, those are the only ones that are going to come out. When the fact was that Moinster, for example, was an Ox-class frigate. A number of others, Capitano, as well, were named for Vietnam veterans who'd lost their lives. And then when you got the Perry class, which was the largest before the Burkes, post-war shipbuilding class, you were able also to name ships both for World War II, Korea, and Vietnam heroes. This is actually one of the more challenging parts of the story, which gets back to one of the comments of both Kevin and Dave Kennedy about getting the Navy in front of the American public, letting them understand it, letting them understand what the Navy does, letting them understand who Navy people are, and giving them a true feeling for what it is that we do and what we're about and what we practice and what we believe.
Thank you.
Hey, great comment there, and shipbuilding. Don't get us started here, but there should always be a submarine USS Caine, and there should always be a surface combatant USS Johnston or USS Samuel B. Roberts or USS Hull, USS Ernest Evans, and the story of Evans would be a wonderful film. So absolutely.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask Dave to share his. He did this for us so well in our recognition of the 75th anniversary of the Battle of Leyte Gulf. But can you talk just briefly on Ernest Evans and his Naval Academy? Give the context. He's an American Indian from Oklahoma, and he takes the test. That was brilliant, and we got so many positive comments from that. Can you reshare that?
Well, Ernest Evans goes to the Naval Academy, and he, when he took the test, I actually went into the Naval Archives and found the test that he took to get in the Academy, and he got a couple questions wrong, and one of them was, what are the things that are present at a meal? And they had a number of, he chose hunger, but the answer was food, right? And what is present at a conflict or a battle, and he chose victory, as opposed to opposing forces, conflict, blah blah blah. So Ernest Evans was a guy who went to a place where he was not necessarily welcomed, and he was a little bit unusual, and it was an opportunity, and he went on board that ship. He went on board the ship and took over. This was I didn't call it the Junkyard Navy in the screenplay that I wrote about the battle, but I did say that it was not the first string, and it was not the second string, and it was not even the Navy's third string. It was an organization that had, but Ernest Evans was a field commander who trained and readied his people for that unexpected event. Why they would be ready, why he would take old married men and draftees on a ship that was just supposed to sit in the rear and take care of the gear. And when the call came and they were attacked, he said, left full rudder, all engines ahead full, stand by for torpedo attack. That was, and his crew fought savagely and well because he did the job of preparing them for that. But that's a story that really does need to be told. But again, Admiral Sonny, what you're looking for in a story is not necessarily a reminiscence of, the older I get, the better I was. Okay. It's not necessarily a documentary about, what a bad AI was, right? It is a story that tells a lesson or is an overcoming something or a problem that has relevance to today. And some of those stories, one of the stories is the El Dorado Canyon event, where the A6s attacked Libya and basically rewrote the ATO, the air tasking order. The Air Force guys didn't, and you saw what happened to them. The other one might be the SS Mayaguez event, where the Navy does a fantastic job of operating in the twilight zone. It's a place between peace and warfare, where decisions are having to be made. And if you're trying to get an AI for you, it's not going to work. because something's going to happen that you didn't expect. That's what the impetus of telling these stories is to get our young people and to get our leaders to think, what would I have done? How would I have reacted? And how could it have changed? And the Battle of Midway is a fantastic example. I can remember the call, come on down, right? Which the torpedo guys were supposed to say to get the fighters to come down and protect them. Fighter guys say, I didn't ever heard that. You know what I mean? Kevin, did you run into those controversies in your research?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wrote about it. BT6 is desperately calling for the Wildcats to come on down. Wildcats, so they had launched with them from Enterprise, actually found Waldron Squadron, but no, the radios of the day were awful, and that transmission was missed. But in my novel, that story's told.
So guys, I don't want to say we're running out of time, but I want to get kind of some. There's been some just brilliant discussion here. One of my new best friends, who we corresponded many times last week over Arctic Navy research, and that asks about post-traumatic stress in World War II specifically. And he shares that his father was a fighter pilot with 2 DFCs for 2 kills, and he came home with PTSD, but it was recognized by the medical professionals and was treated successfully. That hasn't always been the case. Any quick thoughts on PTS from the era of World War II?
Let me offer this. This actually occurred to me when Kevin mentioned the Bedford incident. When you look at Queeg, veteran of the Battle of the Atlantic, then you flash forward to Eric Finlander, who is clearly haunted by his experience in World War II, aided and abetted by having a former U-boat commander on board his frigate during the 1960s chasing a Soviet submarine. You know that these two actually suffered for what would be called PTSD. And the interesting point is that not until we get the movie Greyhound, where Tom Hanks's character, Commander Krause, you see what it's like to be in command and what you're doing, to understand what kind of pressure existed in terms of combat in the Battle of the Atlantic. This is actually something that actually ropes 3 very significant movies and stories together in terms of that story, and it does raise the question of others for aviators and or submariners, given the fact that in each case, when you go back and look at, for example, Air Group 15 and the books that have been written about this and about Dave McCampbell, the fact is that combat aviators did not, in fact, stay in combat throughout the war. They went back and did training, or in many cases, they then moved on, like Jimmy Flatley or Jimmy Thatch, to the staffs of the carrier task forces. The Navy knew that there were limits to what people could handle in terms of being in command and being in combat. And those are good stories that need to be told. Similarly, Lockwood struggling as to whether he should send Mush Morton back to the Sea of Japan in Wahoo for what became Wahoo's last patrol.
Any other thoughts for the panel? Because I've got more if you don't. I'll press on really quickly to Dave Kennedy, and this comes from the namesake of the person whom we'll feature next month at our second Saturday, Ned Beach's Run Silent, Run Deep. So that's a precursor for the audience. But did Humphrey Bogart contribute much to the movie other than act brilliantly? Did he invoke a network? Is there any sea stories? Are there any sea stories about his participation in the movie that you're aware of?
Not that I'm specifically aware of in terms of any networks you might have had with Navy people or to understand their background. But when I see Humphrey Bogart acting, it is an absolutely courageous thing that he's doing, because he is playing an incredibly flawed character. Here's a guy that did Casablanca, right? He's not this kind of an individual who falls apart on the stand. But the quick answer is I'm not aware of it, but we can certainly look into it and see if he might have had some comrades that were naval officers that helped him with it or helped him prepare. But he was also, by the way, suffering from esophageal cancer at the time. And an older man, it was criticized that his age to play the role, but he just absolutely took it on with a passion.
One minor point. Humphrey Bogart was a Navy veteran of World War I.
Great. Okay, you answered the question.
Enlisted veteran, but a veteran of World War I.
Perfect on that. So there's one of our board members asks the referencing that nobody reads the Caine Mutiny anymore. I'm not sure I agree with that, but we will agree that they're not reading it as prolifically as they once did. But the point is, why don't people read Delilah by Marcus Goodrich?
Oh,
and
wow.
The question is, should they? And of course, my answer is, oh hell yeah. But what do you guys think?
It's a great book. It's World War I. The Naval Institute reprinted it in Classics of Naval Literature, but I'm not even sure that's still in print anymore. So it's really hard to get a hold of. But you're absolutely right.
So another question comes in the real world of the Caine. There was the scene where Willie and Merrick and Kiefer go to see Admiral Halsey. Wouldn't they go see a Commodore first, or what was the role of the squadrons back in those days, or was it a little bit more loosey-goosey? What are your thoughts on that?
Having done research this, I think part of the problem was that Herman Wouk's relationship to Third Fleet was as the Big Blue Fleet, that the only connection he actually had with it was, in fact, towing targets for it when they were at Ulysses, before they go out to invade Leyte or to, in fact, support further operations in the Philippines. And they're all in one big lagoon at the time. Halsey's on New Jersey, which is, I think, shown in the movie, but in the book, whereas the movie shows a carrier. And the problem was that I think that for the sake of drama, I think that probably Wouk decided that it would be better to raise the question of taking it all the way to the top. But again, Wouk never left any explanation for how he wrote the book.
I'll agree with Dave there. That's a little literary license.
Yep.
So I am going to kind of wrap this up with a couple of thoughts. First of all, one of the takeaways of this webinar in this second Saturday series is we love our Navy, and our Navy is everything to us. I wanted to be in the Navy when I was in the 6th grade. It's all I focused on. I worked harder in school because I had a goal to become a naval officer. And I think that, we don't necessarily say that over a cocktail to one another, but it's how we feel in our hearts. And it's like when somebody gets punished at sea or whatever, the way we feel about it is that it's, the worst thing you did is ended that person's career. And that's the true tragedy, especially when something happens accidentally or whatever. But here I am with my pack of Lucky Strikes, my steel ball bearings, and it's really not about either of those things. It's just about having fun with a great story that can elicit memories that we can talk about, and you can just see this in the words that are written in the questions and by the geniuses who our Navy. The Navy today stands on the shoulders of our people watching this today, and they stand on your shoulders too, gentlemen. But the point is that if you've seen something that touched you today, or you have ideas for topicality for the future, these webinars are for you. Every single person watching, whether you served in the Navy or not, this is for you. So if you have suggestions, email me, reach out to us. The answer is yes. If you have some suggestions, we want to hear them. So I want to end by thanking our panel. They were just brilliant today. And I also want to thank our foundation cohorts. the Naval History and Heritage Command, Surface Navy Association, Bill Erickson, Navy Submarine League, Tim Oliver. We're going to be working closely on Run Silent, Run Deep for next month. Mike Stevens, MCPON, and the Navy League of the United States, the United States Naval Institute with Pete Daly, the Association of Naval Aviation, the National Maritime History Society, our good friends at Capital Bank. And I want to send a shout out to my Uncle Ron Winger viewing this morning from Monterey, California. We appreciate the viewers of the Armed Forces Retirement Home in Gulfport, Mississippi, as well as the residents of the Goodwin House community in Alexandria here, where our former chair, James L. Holloway II, lived. And finally, I want to shout out to the Navy Judge Advocate General, Vice Admiral John Hannick, for his enthusiastic support of today's webinar, because after all, wasn't Lieutenant Barney Greenwald, Merrick's lawyer, the hero of the story? So thanks again, everyone. See you next time on October the 10th, when we feature Ned Beach's novel and movie, Run Silent, Run Deep. And as Captain Queeg would say, I kid you not, this will be a great program as well. And you know, that throwback Lucky Strike was pretty good. I think I'm going to smoke another. You guys have a great day. We're out here. Thank you.